Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to the new podcast series on Bangladesh's emerging foreign policy narrative. And we are privileged to have Professor Shahabanam Khan with us today in this episode. Professor Khan is a professor of international relations from Jahangarnagar University. At this moment, he's in Lyon as a professor of the Department of International Relations at the Bangladesh University of Professional. A privilege, Professor Khan, to have you here with us to discuss on the recent trends and emerging narratives of Bangladesh's foreign policy. Particularly, we'll be discussing on our economic diplomacy, our positions in the broader geopolitical aspects, particularly when we are experiencing interesting connectivity between Bangladesh and the other regions and various other issues. Hopefully you are doing fine.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Niloy. It's a privilege to be here. And of course, we will be discussing something very, very important for Bangladesh's future, as you have highlighted about the connectivity and how this connectivity is actually shaping Bangladesh's current economic landscape,
Right.
With the potentials for how the future would look like.
Exactly. So just a very basic question. How do you evaluate Bangladesh's role in the last 50 years plus to establish our stronghold in the broader economic aspects of the diplomacy or economic diplomacy, along with a regional neighborhood, also in the global neighborhood?
That's a very important question because this touches upon two fundamental issues. One is our own narrative about ourselves, and the second one is, of course, how we have positioned ourselves in the global interconnected trading regimes, investment regimes, and so on. The first one is we have done fairly good over the past 5 decades. And the credit largely goes to the people because we have a very hardworking labor community. We have a very hardworking policy community as well. So which has created some sort of synergy for us to emerge as an important actor in global economic structure. Because if you look at our depth of economy is quite high in terms of our population, and then its contribution to global economy is extraordinary over the past many years. So I think one critical factor is that Bangladesh's own narrative often ignores the contribution of Bangladesh as a collective entity in the global community has largely been undermined. But I think we have done reasonably well. That allows us to be a part of the greater geopolitical spectrum, which is heavily linked with geoeconomics too. The second one is if you look at Bangladesh's contribution to the labor market. I mean, we are perhaps one of the leading countries in the world which has overseas manpower footprint. The Middle East has become greener. The Middle East economy has become much more vibrant because our labor force is very much there. The second one is we are very competitive when it comes to ready-made garments, which has allowed us to have a very strong foothold in the Western market, which made us very close to China too as a supplier of the raw materials, which means the Bangladesh-China relationship is also very important,
Right.
because that allows us to remain competitive in the Western market. And Western market understands it very well. So I think Bangladesh's foreign policy has done reasonably well when it comes to economic connectivity and economic diplomacy. So I would give a fair credit to Bangladesh's fundamental policy orientation, which is linked with market rather than many other parameters that derailed economic growth, as we have seen in our neighborhood, in the cases of our neighborhood.
Excellent. Thank you. But have you also experienced that the changes in the economic structure of Bangladesh over the period of time is well reflected along with connectivity with the global markets as well. So what I'm trying to say is basically that, once we were agro-based economy, we have moved to more survey-based, a bit of also industry-based, but mostly survey-based if you consider RMG in this context and all that. So that obviously increases our connectivity with the world. How are we doing along with that global market as well? I mean, so far as our supply chain connectivity and
I mean,
so on and so forth.
it's a mixed bag. I mean, it's like many other countries. It's a mixed bag in a sense. Like if you look at Bangladesh's adaptability in terms of the economic changes, uh, that has not really been extraordinarily impressive. I mean, we can perhaps do much better over there. And you have rightly mentioned that shifting towards service sector is perhaps one of the perils of economy because Bangladesh's population continues to grow. So what it means that the service sector is much more of capital intensive, or perhaps rather than what we call labor intensive phenomena. So I think we need to be very careful about it. I mean, we certainly need service sector. If you look at the telcos, if you look at the internet services, hospitality services, I mean, all these services are vital to your economic growth for sure. But at the same time, it has the potential to exclude a large chunk of population, and that's where I think we have to be very, very careful.
Right.
The second issue over here is how we have integrated with the global labor market. I mean, historically, as I have mentioned earlier, that we do have a very strong footprint. But at the same time, the developed countries, or perhaps our major destination for labor, which is the Middle East, is also adopting artificial intelligence, machine learning technologies, and reducing dependency over the overseas manpower. So we need to be very, very careful about that. The third major problem is the skills. And I think this is where we have miles to go when it comes to skills. And I think Bangladesh's education sector needs to be really revamped,
Right.
focusing on technical vocational education rather than over relying on the conventional studies. Or perhaps we should also focus on STEM studies extensively.
Right.
Now, here the problem is not only the education sector, but the manpower behind this education sector, the skilled human resources to teach and to deliver is also missing. At the same time, the market and education integration is still at a very nuanced state. So I think we need to look into that. The fourth one is for sure that when we talk about technological advancement and the population,
Right.
I mean, which is largely been boxed within our understanding of internet, social media, or perhaps a little bit of coding and decoding sort of things. But if you look at from a greater understanding of technology becoming the part of enabling not only the livelihoods but also the means to sustain livelihoods, is still very much in a nuanced stage. So we need to really focus on if we have to compete with the global system.
Exactly. As you have been referring to the global system, and a very critical point is that it's an interconnected world, we all understand. And most importantly, there are different levels. As students of IR, we all used to go through this kind of an understanding. So in the region, we have powerful countries who have their own economic interests and expanding sphere of influence. At the global level, we also have United States and other major powers. And the connectivity mainly based on the economic aspects as we have been experiencing in the last couple of decades is, on the one hand, we have this Indo-Pacific, on the other hand, we have the Belt and Road initiatives, largely economic blocks and connectivity projects, but obviously connecting different countries. Bangladesh is one of the crucial countries in this big supply chain and connectivity endeavors. So what are our opportunities? Let us hear the positive thing first. So what are our opportunities? How can we capitalize that? And probably after that, we can listen a little bit of the challenges as well.
No, I think we are very much in the position to capitalize our relationship. I mean, it's a multi-tiered relationship. I mean, if you see it from a regional perspective, and I think we have done fairly good in terms of maternity health, gender pay, and of course, social stabilization programs. Even if you look at social safety net that we have been providing to the public, is reasonably well. So I think we have done quite well in those aspects. But the problem lies is that overall uh, power relations that we have within the region. And this is where I think we stand fairly different than most of the neighborhood, because we see market as a priority and we don't securitize the market.
Right.
Which means that if you look at Bangladesh's economic freedom index, is not that bad compared to many of our neighboring countries. So what it entails is basically that Bangladesh is able to offer economic incentives, and of course, with the right amount of economic freedom, right amount of investment climate, and reforming the investment climate. Uh, I think that will already make Bangladesh, that has already made Bangladesh a lucrative region. And then on top of that, you have 180 million population, which itself is a huge market. So I think that makes us quite interesting to the major players, since we don't securitize relationship. The second level, when you look into Bangladesh's relationship with the global powers, which is I would take, for the sake of this conversation, China and United States. We have done well. I mean, we have got a very good trade deal with the Trump administration. Um, while we are debating whether the non-disclosure agreement, if there is any, is going to be a detrimental or not. But for now, we have secured reasonably well deals compared to many other countries. And on the other hand, our relationship with China continues to be steady.
Right.
Despite the regime changes, which we have seen in the case of India, has become quite different. I mean, not as continuity one would expect was there. So I think at the global level, our relationship with China and United States has always been on the basis of market complementarity, market relationship, and people-to-people relationship too. So I think our relationship then is in a very, very reasonable state of relationship. And then, of course, if you look at Bangladesh's contribution to international norms, law, and institutions, it has always been impressive. Even if you look at the United Nations initiatives on humanitarian supports for different countries, we've been there. And that's partly because constitutional obligation, Constitution's 25th article, enables Bangladesh to remain at par with the oppressed and suppressed populations. And then, of course, our adherence to international law has always been there. So therefore, I think with the bilateral effective relationship or pragmatic relationship with China and United States, our commitment towards multilateralism has paid a lot of dividend to Bangladesh. And we have always been part of the conversations regarding multilateral trade regimes, which is not only of our interest, but also of global interest to create common goods.
Right.
The only caveat that we have is perhaps finding a right path or courses to be part of the greater economic coalitions those are unfolding. For an example, regional comprehensive economic partnership.
Exactly.
And I think we have been focusing on ASEAN. We are part of ARF and we are part of many other negotiations. And I think this is high time for us to really, really look into whether we can be a part of RCEP or perhaps exercise conversation or debate about the future relationship with the BRICS, I'm not saying that this is going to happen anytime soon or not, but I'm saying that we also need to explore alternative institutions. Now, the purpose of mentioning alternative institutions is not to challenge the existing institutions, but to supplement and keeping our own options open. So we need to be sometimes quite pragmatic to explore that we have plan A, plan B, plan C if there are shocks and other economic vulnerabilities. And as you have mentioned earlier, I think this is where exactly the supply chain comes in, because our supply chain with China, with the United States, with India, with other countries has to be protected too. So one critical task for the government in future is to diversify this supply chain, and how we are going to do would require pragmatic economic policies.
So one way, as you have mentioned, that we need to build our own strength. One is, of course, the diversifying our own advantages on particular aspects, and therefore, prepare ourselves to m- saleable in the global market in a very normal language. But at the same time, economic diplomacy or economics or connectivity is not devoid of the strategic, military, and the hard power competitions that has been going on at this moment. So one big issue, as Bangladesh has always been following historically a non-aligned position, and then friendship to all different foreign policy principles, or whatever way you explain it. But the major challenge at this moment is, of course, that we are not only becoming an economic partner, and you have given the example of RCEP, ASEAN frameworks, and others, but becoming, more closer to one particular block. Are we making strategically? Are we, kind of creating more distant to ourselves from that particular block as well? So it's kind of a strategic rivalry situation, or putting ourselves in a difficult situation in that context, and then comes to the context of how do we balance it. So, what is your take on this issue?
I think, so far, Bangladesh's strategy of balancing relationship with two major power has not failed. But of course, you have absolutely uh, hit the soft spot of the entire discussion. Is that how far can we continue this balancing? I mean, it is not a question about if, it is the question is when are we going to face the pressure of choosing alliance? So I think the first issue that will come up for Bangladesh is how it brands itself as a state that belongs to the concept of neutrality. And I think if you want to be neutral, you have to have your effective mechanisms in your hand, a very strong population, resilient economy, participation in international institutions, and your deterrence capacity. Right. And this is, I think, cannot be done in an isolation. That I'm talking about deterrence one hand, but on the other hand, I'm taking different approach for our institutional engagement with global politics. So I think we need a coordination over here, and I think our economic diplomacy has always been supported by one actor that we often forget to mention, is the private sector. If you don't have a private sector, you're not going to get your economy to run. I mean, state-owned enterprises are phenomenally weak in Bangladesh still today. I mean, even if you take the cases of state-owned banks are being debated as largely weaker than the private sector banks. So I think we need to be very, very careful about this coordination, and we should bring the private sector over here, because the private sector essentially facilitates the market. So this is one. The second important factor, I think, is the government, or perhaps a state needs to understand. Now, I'm using the term state consciously because sometimes we really don't understand that the institutions and the state are different entities. The state has its own structure, and we have to put a lot of effort to keep those structures continuing.
Right.
And hence, having confidence on the institution is important.
Right.
And when you talk about institution, there are two things we need to do. The first, we need to have a political consensus
Exactly.
that institution is the key. Therefore, politicizing institution has paved the ways for discontent and grievances, and we have seen in the case of the 5th of August. And then subsequently, when we talk about institutions, we also have to talk about the respect for law and democracy. So I think our fundamental job that we should not forget that if we want to be a part of the global changes,
Right.
if we want to be a part of the global economic structure, which is fundamentally different than what it used to be yesterday, I mean, we really have to have a political understanding of that, and that calls for continuity, the term continuity. And I think, Dr. Nila, you would agree that one of our major challenges in foreign policy is to establish continuity of our relationship.
Exactly.
Right? So when you have the discontinuity, I mean, that means you have to start from zero once again. So time to time, after 54 years of our independence, I don't think we can afford restarting every now and then. So what it means is that I think there has to be a political consensus about what would be our foreign policy narrative, how we are going to ensure continuity, for which you need very apolitical institutions.
Right.
And then third, you need to create a resilient economy which should be based on highly skilled population, which is not only skilled in terms of labor, but also in terms of critical thinking.
Right.
And of course, in terms of digital literacy.
Exactly.
And I may want to add probably slightly not, slightly irrelevant to this particular discussion, but take it as a footnote to this discussion is also disinformation and misinformation, which gives a very bad branding sometimes. And we have seen in many media, Bangladesh is demonized left and right, right? So we need to have that kind of social capital, social ownership, social fabric to diffuse or resist disinformation, misinformation. Otherwise, all the good things that we are doing will always be perished by anybody and everybody.
Thank you so much. I mean, we have got so many suggestions in between the discussions from here as well for the government of Bangladesh and obviously for the other stakeholders. I'm just wondering, like, I mean, we are talking about economic connectivity, development, diplomacy, economy, and all these things. But at the same time, I think, conflict is still a very important issue. And while doing this exercise, under a research project or policy paper project, how do you counter, and what Bangladesh should prepare itself for, particularly when we are watching, Middle East situation where a peace process has been achieved, but still we have, in our own neighborhood, we have been dealing with conflicts with Myanmar. So the troubled neighborhood is there, the global conflict is there, but still in the connectivity project, how do we establish our diplomacy in such a way that we survive well and it really, really good?
No, as I told you, I mean, we need to understand foreign policy first, right? And we think that Ministry of Foreign Affairs is foreign policy. It is not. Or perhaps the Prime Minister's office is foreign policy, which is not. I mean, have we ever thought about inclusion of private sector as a main part? Because my private sector would always like to have business relationship with Myanmar.
Right.
I mean, look, whatsoever is happening between Myanmar and India border, their relationship continues. I mean, look at the whole tension between China and United States. Trade continues. Look at the relationship between China and India. $90 billion trade deficit in favor of the Chinese. I mean, so the politicians would always create the hypes and so many things, right, their domestic interests. But at the end of the day, it is the private sector. Ambani wants to do trade, Adani wants to do trade, Bill Gates wants to do trade, Elon Musk, no reason to think that he doesn't want to do trade. So Starlink is here too, right? I mean, so all these things are very much there. So what we need to understand that foreign policy needs to come out of the statist prism of bilateralism. Rather, it has to come with a broader definition of relationship in which non-state actors are important too. So what I would suggest, I mean, Bangladesh always had for 54 years traveled neighborhood. I mean, our neighbors were not always very kind on us. I mean, as if that has stopped us. No, we have done super good. So what I would suggest is always that first find a continuity. Right. And I think Myanmar, I mean, we have plenty of opportunities to rebuild our relationship with Myanmar, despite having ASEAN has a very good relationship. Exactly. Cambodians and everyone, Thais have perfect relationship with Myanmar, despite Myanmar having a troubled ecosystem. So I would suggest that we need to focus on building trade relationship, focus on building people-to-people relationship, focusing on trade connectivity. I mean, you look at Bangladesh is just sitting between Southeast and Southeast Asia, right? Right. And even if you see it from a very topographical point of view, we're the plain lands. I mean, if you go through Bangladesh's trade route through India to Pakistan to Central Asia, I mean, I'm quite utopian at the moment, but see, I mean, this is how the global order has changed. I mean, South Asia has always been behind everything. I mean, India, despite having 1.4 billion population, still not the economy that I would compare with China, United States, or anybody in that matter. But it will be one of the largest economy, probably third, fourth, fifth largest economy in the world. But again, that amount of money has to trickle down to the bottom. Right? I mean, the wealth has to trickle down to the bottom. It's the same thing for Bangladesh. I mean, even if you create wealth, if the wealth is not trickled down to the bottom, I mean, that wealth is not going to give you social resilience or economic resilience at any point of time. So the point over here, what I'm saying, that unless you come up with the market solutions with Myanmar, market solutions for Northeast India, market solutions for India as such, and really get a win-win relationship among the private sectors, I think foreign policy will always be a talk shop rather than an effective delivery mechanism. So my last point as such is that we need to depoliticize our market mechanisms and let it go as it is.
Okay, exactly. Any last word for the development partners, our international development partners who have been engaging with us?
I think, I mean, this is one critical issue that I always raise. I'm not a great fan of financing. I don't love the term that for everything I go to the development partner and give me money. Now that's something I don't like. What I like about is the technical partner. So if you have the technical support, I mean, support for the market creation, go for support for the market, trade. So how we can best support us to have a better trade relationship. Now, one point, I mean, just as an example to you, I mean, are we going to give humanitarian assistance to Myanmar, or are we going to go for trade relationship? I mean, I would always go for trade relationship because that's a long term. Right. That involves different stakeholders, that creates certain economy that cycles. But if you have the humanitarian assistance, it is one of kind of project, right? So you see, this is how I think the development approach has to change. And then the community ownership is one critical factor. I mean, your development has to be owned by the community. Exactly. All right. I mean, if you just come with the donor supported programs, 5 years, 10 years, and, but community needs to learn to own. So community needs to learn to protect its own business. I mean, it cannot be that one fine morning or one ugly evening, government changes and the entire business changes. I mean, that is not what you call sustainable continuity. So this is why my strongest recommendation has always been, I mean, that international community. I'm not using the term donor here. I would rather use the term international community. Should help in creating export diversification,
Right.
creating diversification in terms of supply chain, invest in trading regime, economic institutions,
Right.
instead of what we conventionally see as the development approach. So community ownership, state ownership, government ownership, public ownership, private sector ownership, different levels of ownership, we have to get into that culture.
Right. Right. Thank you so much. It's mesmerizing. I've been listening quite, with my full attention, and it seems that we have to do a lot of work. So it's a long way to go for Bangladesh to prepare, as you have said, like in your own words, in institutionalizing, depoliticizing, to make the foreign policy work, particularly to steer with this complex world order. Thank you once again, Professor Shahabanam Khan. It's always a pleasure to listen to you and to have you here in this podcast with us. Thank you once again, dear viewers. So we have just had an amazing conversation with Professor Shahabanam Khan, Professor of International Relations to Jahangirnagar University and currently at Bangladesh University of Professionals. We have been discussing on various issues, particularly on economic diplomacy, global supply chain, Bangladesh's balancing roles, and many very critical issues. And he has provided a significant amount of recommendations for the government of Bangladesh, for the private sector, and other critical stakeholders. Thank you for staying with us.